Hey, everyone. Welcome to, I think this is week 4 or week 5. It's hard to tell now in COVID time what week or day it is anymore. But I want to welcome you to this class, a special class, where we are following John and breaking with the normal pattern of things and doing an interlude of our own, like he does in chapters 11 and 12. And in this chapter, sorry, in this class, I just want to discuss the way that John uses numbers. There's 4 ways that John uses numbers, and we're going to focus really in on 2 of those. Yeah, 2 of those. The first way that John uses numbers is that he just mentions numbers a lot. So especially numbers 7, divisions of 12, 4s, 2s, those have some sort of symbolic significance. We could talk about those if you'd like to, but I'm going to focus on the weirder stuff that people get confused and hung up on. The other thing that the other way that numbers are used is with the numbers of times things are said. So, for example, I'm going to tell you the lamb is mentioned, I think, 14 times. I'm just going to grab this. Actually, this might be helpful. If I grab Ian's commentary real quick. 7 blessings, 7 sickles, 7 times God is titled Lord God Almighty, 7 occurrences of Christ, testimony of Jesus, prophecy, I am coming, sign, endurance, cloud, 7 mentions of the elders. Jesus and the Spirit and the saints are all mentioned 14 times. And then you've got the faithful witnesses are mentioned 2 times 7, which is 14. So that's another way that it's done. And this is, it happens a lot, so it could be mapped out. We're not going to do that. We're going to focus on the last 2 primarily, and that is another way that it's an important way in which the numbers are used is John focuses on 3 types of numbers that are called square, we would call square, triangular, and rectangular numbers, and I'll come to those in just a minute. Another way in which John uses numbers in Revelation is he does things that they're number puzzles called gematria or isopsephy, and we'll talk about those as well. But I just wanted to tell you lots of ways in which numbers are used. We're going to focus in on 2. Before we do get into that, that friend of mine, Ian Paul, has written a really great blog this week on his blog called Say Fidzo. It's a Greek word done in English. Let me see if I can I just type on my screen here? Do I have a whiteboard option? No, I don't. Nope. That one. No. Anyway, we could talk about it later. I can send you the email. I'll do that. That's how to work. Email. Sayfidzo.com, where he talks about people are asking, are we in the days of Revelation? And he's got a very pastoral but also academic and very realistic approach to that. And so I think that you might enjoy it. Anyway, what I want to do now is dive into some numbers. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see what I'm talking about. Nope, that's not what I want. Let's just share the desktop, yeah? Okay. And there we go. Revelation and numbers, get out of the way thing. Here we go. So our interlude, Nero, we're going to talk about Emperor Nero. You may know he was a terrible emperor. He's the first persecutor of Christians, and we'll talk about how terrible he is in a little bit. But we're going to do some first century mathematics. Now, typically, I think this is the way it works. When we talk about 666, that's the major number that people will pick. Right? People will talk about the way that we figure out what numbers mean in Revelation, or people will say that's the number of the beast, and they'll take throughout history people have done this, but with more recently people have done it with Reagan, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, that they say, look, if you take his name and you figure out the numbers, the values of each letter, it adds up to 666. And that's really artificial for us. So for example, I can do this, ready? There's my name. And look at that, A equals 1, E equals 10. That's common across them. The T's are 150. You know what, folks? 666. Sorry to be the ones to tell you this class is open. No, just kidding. But guess what? My middle name is Rhett. So how do you make that work? And so this is what people do. They make up these values so that the name adds up to 666. That took me a little while to figure out, a little longer than I was thinking it would. But anyway, that's really artificial for us. But for the first century, that wasn't so artificial. I talked about this a little bit. So let's take a look at that. Number words. What do I mean by that? Until we got Arabic numerals, right, the way that Western cultures have figured out or used numbers was to use their alphabet. So for example, that is to say, until 1200, people used letters for counting until that date. This is around the time of the Crusades, right? So more interaction with Arab nations. So for example, in Latin, you should know these values: I, V, X, L, C, M. I put them in order for you all. So 1, 5, 10, 50, 100, and M, millennium, 1,000. In Greek and Hebrew, it's the same thing. Well, no, it's not. They do use their letters for numbers, but the way that those values are assigned are different. Let me actually switch over to a little handout to show you what I mean by that. Oh, that's too much. Down here. So in Hebrew, right, the letter Aleph, so this is going down from the first column then to the second column, down to the third column. These are the values of each of their letters. So Aleph or A is worth 1, whereas Tau, the final letter, is worth 400, right? So you see they go up to 10, and then it's 20, and then 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on. Don't worry about that. I'm not going to quiz you on Hebrew or anything. But that's just to say that those numbers or those letters had numerical values, and those are set. Whereas what we did with my name, I had to make up, because we don't do that anymore. And so when people do that nowadays, they make up the values for the names. Anyway, let's go back to this. Here we go. So if I was to ask you, for example, what is CXVI, you all would say to me very quickly, that's 116. So in Greek and in Latin and in Hebrew, there's a natural connection between numbers and words. In a certain way, it sort of feeds into like a magical culture that is on the fringes of all these societies. Numerical values of names and of words and the way that things are said. So like the word abracadabra comes from this Greek-ish god called Abraxas. We'll talk about that some other day in another class. Not now. So those are a number of words. That's just something that we need to bear in mind as we're reading Revelation, because for John, through him, there's still a natural connection between his words that he's using and numbers. And there have been scholars, not just the cuckoo ones, but very serious, reliable scholars who have done work on the book of Revelation, and not just the way that he uses numbers, but even the numbers of letters that he'll use in the places where he puts certain words as numerical markers. But, how far do we want to go down the rabbit hole? We don't need to do that. Let's just do a little bit. Just get our toes wet. So I've been using a couple of words. Gematria and isopsephy they're basically interchangeable words. Gematria is for Hebrew, isopsephy is for Greek usually. And they're just ways of saying that words have a numerical value and that there's a puzzle involved. Okay, so you've got this handout. I won't read these to you, but that's it. So I am going to say that John does place gematria or isopsephy in his book. In fact, this friend Ian Paul, his blog is called Seifidzo, which means I calculate. It's because of his fascination with the book of Revelation that he picks that as his blog title. Anyway, here we go. So here are some examples of the, just to show you, right, before you look at all this, just so you know that I'm not crazy and that I'm not just making all this stuff up, but that this was common in the first century world. I've got a slide with a few examples of how this has been used around the same time that Revelation is written. So it's not something that I made up. It's really there. And you can rely on this. I'm a doctor. You can't take that to the hospital or anything, but you can take it to your Bibles and consider it reliable. So I told you about this graffiti in Pompeii. I love her, whose number is 545. So again, around the time that this book was written, the Epistle of Barnabas. Barnabas was one of the colleagues of Paul. This letter was written in the 1st century, but it was not included in the biblical canon. If you were to read it, you'd see there's a couple of quirky things in there. But he's looking at the way that the number 318 happens in Genesis 14:14. He's offering a numerical explanation, a symbolic explanation for that. So he's doing that in the 1st century as well. Augustine in the 4th century, 5th century is doing this as well. He's talking with his church, and this is in a sermon. He says, for the miraculous catch in John 21, he says, look, if you add 1 to 17, it adds up to 153. Do it like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 are 10. But he's trying to help them solve the number, because this is, I mean, it's part of their context, part of the world, part of the things that they do, sort of number puzzles. Again, something that's sort of lost. My family, right? We get in the car, we don't do number puzzles, we do the animal game. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's weird things that my family does. No, probably, but they don't seem weird to me until people notice them. Anyway, but that's what the 1st century, through the, who knows what century it was like. Other examples in the New Testament where numbers are used significantly. There's 4 Gospels. Now, I'm not saying that there's a lot more Gospels than that, but there is an early church father who defends the reason why there are only 4 Gospels and no more is because he says there are 4 corners of the earth, you're making reference that every tribe, nation, language, and tongue. And so there could not be more than that. Now, we do have Gospels that show up in the late 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 9th, and even the 20th century, where someone made one up and snuck it into a library and tried to pass it off. There are 14 letters of Paul. Now, some people say there are only, so that would include Hebrews. Now, Hebrews was believed to have been written by Paul in the early days. But again, that's the complete set. In Romans, Paul quotes the Old Testament 7 times. So even Paul, that are systematic, look, this plus this equals this. You need the Spirit, the end. Even he is drawn to the significance, numerical significance of just numerical significance. There we go. So he makes 7 quotes to show that Gentiles and Jews are under sin. And again, 7 being a number for completion, complete, entire. Look, you're under it, the end, story over. Okay, so that's all to say this is going on in the 1st century. It's not something that people are just making up to look for. Now, the way that it's often done in our fantastical, out there, weirdo blog sites or crazy books on rapture, whatever stuff, that they tend to abuse this rather than understand it. Okay. Now, another thing you need to be familiar with is Pythagoras. We don't need to be familiar. You all probably know Pythagoras, right? From this Pythagorean theorem, right? We got this up here. Let's see. Yeah, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? So the 2 lengths of a triangle, a right triangle, the 2 square sides, 2 sides of the triangle squared and added together equals the square of the hypotenuse. There you go. That's one thing that he's known for. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Pythagoras also developed his own sort of essentially a religious system that involved the importance of numbers, right? Because numbers are interesting. They're different from, right? I can, when I look at, say, like a tree, I know what makes a tree a tree. I can see it. There it is. That's the tree. It's got the leaves and the branches and so on and so forth. I can tell when it no longer is a tree. Well, maybe I wouldn't know the exact moment. But if I was to hold up this many fingers and I'd say, what is it about this that makes it 3? It's not the fingers. It's something that's more than them. And so this idea that numbers are the closest somehow to perfect reality, I don't want to push that too far. All I want to say is that numbers are really important to Pythagoras. It became really important to people in the 1st century. Well, from his time, from 4th century BC to the 1st century and on, we have Pythagoreans. people who follow both even Plato was in a certain extent influenced by the importance of numbers, but all the way up into the time of John and beyond. Hold on, let's see if I've got a joke. There we go. Hooray. It's a good joke. But for Pythagoras, there were sets of numbers that were important, triangular numbers. Numbers, and so what you could do, these numbers that were important, triangular numbers, square numbers, and rectangular numbers that were important to Pythagoras, important to first century people, are numbers that you could also make shapes out of. You'd take stones and you could set them out. And so if you could set a triangle, the first triangle would be 1 stone, but then in order to make the next triangle, right, you'd need 3 stones, and then you would need, there you go, you've got 6 stones to make your triangle. And the square would be easier, right? You just sort of double the number. Rectangular number would be 2 consecutive numbers, 3 and 4 multiplied together. That would give you a rectangle. But they make shapes, okay? And so these are, it would be like our times tables. You would know, if you actually went to gymnasium and were taught mathematics, you would know these, what is the 4th triangle, or what is the 5th triangle, or what's the 100th triangle if you were a brilliant student. We also have some really important Pythagoreans, one from Smyrna, one of our churches, he was based there, and then Philo of Alexandria, who's a Jewish writer in the 1st century, around the time, lived and died around the time of Jesus, and he also makes important reference to these types of numbers. So all that to say, again, this is the historical background. That's what's going on for John and his readers, okay? So let's take a look at some of these numbers and the way they work, okay? Oh, if we look at this chart real quick, here's the chart. The way this chart works is I'm giving you 3 columns, or 3 rows, triangles, squares, and rectangles. Those are the types of numbers. So the first triangle, if you go to the first column, first triangle is just 1 stone. The first square is also just 1 stone. But for rectangle, you need at least 2, right? So 2 next to each other like that. If you want to do the second triangle, you need 3 stones, like I said. For the second square, it's 2 times 2, so you need 4. For the second rectangle, it's 2 times 3, so you get 6. Third triangle, and so on and so forth. And if you look at this chart, you're going to start to see some important numbers to us, right? We've got 42 there. We've got 144. We've got, lo and behold, 666, 1,260. 1,232 is important in a different text, but not ours. Anyway, let's go back to the slideshow. So all this is to say, come on, get out of the way. From that chart, these are called the series numbers across the top, and these are the values of those series. It's just to try and explain the chart. This is why I like doing the class in person. So if you have questions about this, all I'm trying to say is that 3 types of numbers are important to this book to understand: triangular numbers, square numbers, and rectangular numbers. If I was to say the 4th triangular number, that would be 10, okay? Now you want to see something really amazing. This will just blow your mind. Maybe it won't. All right, 666 is the 36th triangle. If you go back up here, 36 is also a triangle. This is like a double triangular number. That doesn't happen a lot. So when people hear that, they'd be like, whoa, something important is happening here. Pay attention, okay? So John uses that intentionally. And again, his context works so wonderfully, so providentially well, that everything just sort of falls into place in a beautiful way that he's able to make use of something like this, okay? Boop, boop, boop. All right, so our triangular numbers. That's our first triangle, 1. Second triangle, 3. Third triangle, 6. My finance students in Indonesia helped me remember the formula for this. And it's the number of the triangle times the number plus 1 divided by 2 is how you figure out what the triangular number is. So anyway, for square numbers, the first square is 1, second square is 4, third square is 9. And you should know that. You should know up to your 12s, right? That's what we were all taught. Rectangular, first is 2, second is 6, third is, oh, I don't give you that, sorry. It's the number times the number plus 1. Okay, that's your formula. Now, all 3 of these types of numbers show up in Revelation. Okay, there you go. There's that whole chart, that beautiful, beautiful chart. I expect you to memorize this for when we talk about it on Thursday. Good. Now, it is important to notice the way that John uses these in this place, right? The number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, right? Not men, not of humanity, but of a man. And his number is 666. That's important because almost immediately after this, it's followed. Oh, sorry. It is in chapter 14, the 144,000 put together. But look at this. So they measured the wall, 144 cubits, by the counting of a man, which is the counting of an angel, right? So again, counting a number, these connected words, 144, counting of a man, counting of an angel, number of a beast, number of a man, 166. Look at what John has done. It's fascinating. Yes, the Bible is written in Greek. John is doing something sort of doubly tricky by using Hebrew letters to calculate these values. So the word with Hebrew letters, the word in Greek is therion, and these are the Hebrew letters, it's what we call transliterated, is 666. The word for beast, okay? The word for angel is 144. So angelos. And that these two work out that way is a way of confirming that he's using this approach to gematria, that he's using Hebrew numerical values. Okay. Now, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is a number of man, 666. I looked and behold, 144,000. You get the two numbers put sort of against each other. So you know that these two are competing. These two are not, they're not buddies. And these are two different sets of numbers. 666 belongs to one category. If you remember the chart, it belongs to triangular numbers. 144 belongs to square numbers. So, and let's look at a few more. This comes from the passage that Cecilia was asking about the temple, right? He's given a rod that was like a staff. He's told, rise, measure the temple, don't measure the court. He doesn't actually do it, though, which is, he's told to do it. He's following this pattern of Ezekiel. But anyway, leave it out, that portion. They'll trample on it for 42 months, and I will grant authority, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. These are also important numbers, but they're a different set of numbers from triangular or square. These are rectangular numbers. I'm just going to do a quick calculation, make sure I'm right. Yeah, okay, so 42 times 30 is 1,260. So these are 42 30-day months in the mind of this author. Oh, that's right, numbers, here we go. So if we were to take, oh, sorry, last one, the woman who runs away from the dragon and gives birth to a child, she's nourished for 1,260 days. Now compare, right? He's got two sets of numbers to work with from Daniel. He's got 1,290 and then I think 1,335 in Daniel. But he sort of rounds it out to 1,260. You get the sense that John is doing this very purposefully. He's crafted this in a way that he wants you to understand a certain message. There you go. Our 42 months once again. So what's happening? Just a simple version. Triangles, evil. Squares, good. Rectangles are time periods. Now, let's fit this a bit more into the biblical language itself. So here we go, from Ian's commentary. John consistently uses the square and cubic numbers 144,000 and 1,000 to designate the things of God, in particular, people of God. By contrast, he uses the triangular number 666 to designate the opponent of God. And in a fascinating conjunction of maths and theology, he uses rectangular numbers which have something in common with both square and triangular numbers, but that's set that aside. He uses rectangular numbers to designate that period of time when God's people are oppressed by their opponents and yet enjoy the protection of God. The 42 months equals 1260 days of Revelation, but it shows us not only that, but how sophisticated John is as a writer. So that's that portion. That's how those numbers are being used, okay? I do want to hint at one thing that's going on here to sort of lead us into our next section. There's a book called The Ascension of Isaiah. It's a Christian book that, glasses are falling apart, talks about a figure, a Nero-like figure, who is the Antichrist. Now, again, Antichrist does not show up in the book of Revelation. Now, there are figures who are clearly against Christ in this book and who are warriors against the Lamb and against God. But this Nero-like Antichrist figure in Revelation, in Ascension of Isaiah, shows what's going on in that first and second century context, the way that people thought about who Nero was, his relationship to the church, and his relationship to Christ. I can't remember if I have a text about Nero. I think I do. And he says that this figure will be around for 1,332 days, which again is one of our numbers. If you look back at that chart, I won't go back to it. It doesn't fit the same paradigm exactly that John's does. He's using it in a different way, which is fine, but it's still one of these significant numbers. That's all. Okay, so part 2. Nero is the beast, or Nero as the beast. Now, I am not trying to say that this is purely that John is trying to say this is just about the first century, but that John is using imagery and ideas that are associated with Nero to paint a picture of what it's like to be a Christian in the midst of persecution and the temptation to compromise in the midst of a powerful empire. Okay. So here we go. Nero, is he Albrecht Dürer's 7-headed, sometimes 8-headed beast? Okay. Sorry, hold on. Let me lock this door just a second. I'm recording class. Sorry, children, family, life. Here's something that's fascinating. The name Nero Caesar or Nero Caesar in Hebrew adds up to 666. Now you may say, Andrew, you just did what you said we're not supposed to do. Partially, right? Because these are real values. I didn't make up those values. You can look at the chart. Those are the real values of those letters. But he probably didn't go around, my name's Nero Caesar, except that he definitely did. This is a coin from the first century, and you see Nero and Caesar. I don't know if his neck actually looked like that. It's not a terribly flattering picture. But anyway, if this is the most common, right, this is passed around all day. You have coins, you're passing them around. You see this all the time. That this is a pretty fair, suggestion that this could be who John is referencing, because he does say it's the number of a beast, the beast, which is the number of a man. And let's try and draw some more out. So that's all well and good. All right. Oh, there's another one. Nero, Caesar, Augustus. Why didn't they include Augustus? Well, because not all the coins have Augustus, but also Augustus is a divine name. Maybe they don't want that. So this was a question that was raised in my last class that I taught this. They said that, yes, but if you look at sometimes footnotes in the Bible will say, some manuscripts say 616, not 666. And this only further proves my point. There are 2 old Greek manuscripts that say, so right, when people are looking at the oldest Greek text that we have for the New Testament, they don't always match up perfectly. We've got all sorts of issues that happen, usually what's called elision, right? A scribal error. Like it won't make any sense. Like a scribe would write the word and, but forget the letter in. And so it says add. So it'd be something like that. Or they're reading one line, and like 2 lines down, it has the same word in it. And so they're looking back and forth, and accidentally skip 2 lines as they're writing. So we have all these manuscripts. Some of the old manuscripts have the number 616 instead of 666. Most of them read 666. Now, here's the deal. The problem is for this transliteration is 2 things. One is that I'm trying to remember this. There's 2 cases of what happens here. So you got 666 is the Greek transliteration into Hebrew. 616 is Caesar Nero Latin into Hebrew. Still adds up to 616. That adds up to 616. You see, so I've got the top Greek transliteration. So that is putting the Greek into Hebrew letters, and then the bottom one is putting the Latin word into Hebrew letters. So it'd be done slightly differently, and so it only proves the point. This person, the scribe, thought this is supposed to be a reference to Nero, and whoever wrote this, they made a mistake. So we need to fix that. I'll do 616. So it's a person making a correction, thinking that the author, that this manuscript they had an error in it. And maybe we can talk about this a little bit more. Can be a little bit confusing. But whoever did that thought they were fixing a mistake, when in fact they didn't realize how 666 did fit into John's scheme. So they missed out on their maths weren't as good as John to realize this is a triangular number, and that's important. Okay. I've also been told that in the Greek, depending on the case of the word Nero, that it could also add up to 616 in a different Greek transliteration. But just set that aside. Someone was reading their footnotes, said, hey, what about this? And so I had to answer that. And so I figured I'd do it now too. Look at this. This is great. The riddle's not great, sorry. But the connection that's made. I'm trying to, I don't think we have text about Nero. Nero was a pretty terrible guy, pretty crazy towards the end of his life. Caligula before him was also awful. Caligula, between him is Gaius. Oh, there's one emperor between Caligula and Nero, but they're both terrible. Nero is the first persecutor of Christians, and we have these texts from the first from that time period that say, none of us like Christians. Obviously, they're terrible. But this is what Nero did in Rome. He took Christians, put them on poles, covered them with pitch, and set them on fire so that they could be street lights for the night. He put furs from wild animals on them, and then sick dogs on them. What else did he do? I've forgotten this text. Maybe it will show up. But Nero was awful. And though the persecution was probably primarily in Rome and then some of the bigger cities like Laodicea or Ephesus, not in Jerusalem as much, but the person that they felt that intensely, this is as bad as it can get for a Christian. So, but Nero was pretty widely by upper class educated people viewed as a bad, outside of Rome, sorry, not just upper class, outside of Rome, he was viewed as horrible. And the Roman nobility thought he was horrible. He bankrupted the empire for all intents and purposes. And so we'll talk about it a little bit more. But here we go. People were already doing, this is from the 2nd or 3rd century. 2nd century. This was a riddle that was done about Nero using gematria. Neopsephon neron idian metera apactena. A new calculation. Nero killed his own mother. Now look at this. This is why they did this. Nero, in Greek, adds up to 1005. And killed his own mother adds up to 1005. They're like, look, he had to. Oh, sorry, he did kill his own mother. That's the point of this. He killed lots of people in his family because he became paranoid, like Herod did, paranoid of people taking over from him. Okay, but there you go. You've got that calculation now. So look at this. Neopsephon is the word for a new calculation. Neo, that's where we get that we use even now for new. Psephon is the word calculation. Look at this. Psephidzo is the word I calculate. And that word shows up here in Revelation 13. It is a puzzle, and it's telling you, figure it out. And it's not like he hid it that much. There's a lot in this text that tells us he's making a reference to Nero without saying Nero, and he does that on purpose. It's not as though he's scared of being persecuted, but by not naming it as Nero specifically, he allows this to be an ongoing warning to Christians for every generation. If he'd said, it's just Nero, then people would be like, oh, this is from the past. We don't need to worry about it. Yes, I'll worship your God and Jesus. I can do that. This is about old stuff. This isn't about us. But by doing it in this way, Nero just becomes a type, a figure who is that ongoing threat, that opposite power of Christ that threatens the church with death, suffering, persecution, but also with the compromises that empire brings. Ooh, look at this is the one. This is great. Now, on top of that, the Roman historian named Philostratus writes this about Nero. I know not either how many heads he has, nor whether he has crooked talons or jagged teeth. In any case, though this beast is said to be civil, yet he is so much wilder and fiercer than animals, so that he rends and devours all alike. And again, there is no such beast anyhow, of which you can say it devours some other, but Nero is gorged with such glory, right? People are already talking about Nero in a way that sounds really familiar, right? How many heads, beast. I mean, this should be ringing some bells for you all. Oh wait, unless we haven't read that far. You got it. You know what I'm talking about. Now, after Nero, what happened, right? He nearly bankrupted the empire. This is his tomb. He nearly bankrupted the empire. He knew a few things he had to do. As an emperor, there's one thing you cannot fail to do, and that's pay and feed your army. And Nero tried to do that, and he succeeded mostly, but he kept throwing festivals and games and horse races in Rome, and the average person loved it. It was great. Hooray, look, he's throwing another feast. But you're taxing and depleting your resources everywhere else. And eventually the military turned against him. So all he had left was a Praetorian Guard, which is like the secret service, right, for the emperors. The Senate is completely against him. And then the Praetorian Guard turns on him. And so Nero asks his friend to kill him. And his friend refuses to. And so as the story goes, Nero stabbed himself in the neck. Now, if you remember in the book of Revelation, there's one head on the beast that looks like it has been wounded on the head, but is recovering from its wound, right? Like the lamb that looks like as though it has been slain, but it's alive. But John could not get a more perfect Antichrist figure. Now, that's not to say that Nero didn't die. He does die. This is his tomb. Now, I hope I'm remembering this correctly, so you can't quote me on this part. But from what I do recall, they wanted to wipe out his memory. That's true. So he was buried, and then his tomb was covered, and they turned it into a public toilet. I'm 99% sure that's the case. 95 now that I've said it out loud. But his memory, they tried to wipe out his memory. He was a terrible. He blames the burning of Rome on the Christians when clearly the part that burned down, there weren't Christians living there. He just wanted that place to build his golden palace. After him, the Emperor Vespasian, he starts the Flavian dynasty. He's a Roman general. He takes over and he rescues the empire so that it lasts for another 410-ish years. So, anyway. Okay. So here we go, the wounded head, right? And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and heads. One of its heads seems to have a mortal wound, but it was healed. Telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Again, just that connection to, like, John could not have gotten a better example of of a figure who is Christ, anti-Christ-like. Why does that matter, though? Yeah, if he didn't come back from the dead, if he wasn't raised, why does that matter? I'll make two connections here. One, you've got the connection to Babylon, or from Babylon to Rome itself, right? The 7 heads of this beast are 7 hills on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, right? Rome is made up of 7 hills. Here you go, the various hills, and the connection there between those beasts. So why am I trying to establish a connection between Rome and Nero and the beast? Well, because John is doing it, and I want you to be able to see that. The reason why is because people speak of Nero not having died, right? The public didn't get to see a funeral. He was buried, it was all covered up, and people thought, well, he didn't actually get killed, right? This is the way, I mean, even nowadays, right? People, Elvis he didn't die, he was kidnapped by aliens, or Tupac Shakur, who was, shot in a drive-by shooting in the 1990s, he wasn't actually killed. He lives in Canada now. I mean, we love, right? Hey, I didn't see the body. I didn't see a funeral. And so we have these stories. This is to connect a very real fear that people had at the time, that Nero was the first emperor of Rome who was on good terms with the Parthian Empire. So this is, right, you can see the Mediterranean on the far west there, and then that's Cappadocia is just north of Israel. And then you've got the Parthian Empire. This is the old Persian Empire. All the previous emperors have been at war with the Parthian Empire, but Nero was buddies with them. He made peace, and he crowned their emperor. And so people were afraid that he not only had he not, this is like an ongoing threat, right? This is the frontier territory. They don't possess this. So people were afraid he had gone to Parthia and was going to bring back an army. Now, what proof do I have for that? Well, the proof is that 3 texts from the 1st through 3rd centuries write about this. Suetonius, the Sibylline Oracles, which are a Christian Jewish texts that talk about these sorts of things, and Diachrysostom. They all talk about the belief that people had that Nero hadn't died and that he was coming back. Right? You've got a resurrected emperor, so to speak. And on top of that, after Nero died in 69, 80, 88, and 89, people came back and they said, I'm Nero, here I am. I'd like my crown and my throne back. And the way they were able to fool people, or at least fool some people, is they looked like Nero. That's all. You just have to take that coin with the big neck and look, that's me. Or a statue, and people were like, oh my goodness, it is him. And in fact, the last set that came, the last one that came, brought part of the Parthian Empire with him, and to mount a sea attack. But from what I recall, again, my memory is failing me a little bit on this, that it never amounted to anything, and that was destroyed in a storm. So several things are happening in this text, right? John is using those numbers to draw out those who follow God, the opponents of God, and then that time period when the opponents look like they're prevailing, but they're under God's protection. He's also using these numbers to point out, who is this figure? This figure is that one, in this case Nero, that one who embodies, embraces, and represents everything that is against the Lamb who is slain, right? The sacrificial death that is given for others to demonstrate what does, who is God. The giving of life to save the many, a sacrifice of love, right? This is love, to lay down one's life for one's friends, versus the beast who attacks and kills and destroys. And you've got these 2 conflicting images in which John is using numbers to try and draw out some of the symbolic significance. And you should have seen that it's Nero, because his name adds up to 666. Okay. And I forgot why I put this slide on here. and is not and is an eighth and is one of the seven, it goes to destruction. Sort of points you. The thing is that it does point you in the direction that all of Revelation is heading. It seems as though the beast is winning, but at the same time, people are enjoying the protection of God, and ultimately, truly, deeply, the point of all of this is that in the midst of suffering, of persecution, and so on and so forth, that there will be an end to it. And that this will be separated from us, and that will no longer be a thing that the people experience, but instead they experience God's provision, his safety, and above all, they get to participate in the life of God that is defined by who he is, and that is love. Okay? So that is it for this week. If you have questions, write them down, and we can talk about them on Thursday. I'd be happy to hear any questions you have. If you have any that you think will need me to prep, please send me those in advance. I don't know if I'll need to. I've done this now. This is my fourth or fifth time teaching this class, plus teaching at university. So I've gotten a lot of questions. Every once in a while, somebody surprises me. So anyway, that's it. I will see you all on Thursday.